Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So I deserve very little credit for the morning event, but I had a great time. I hope you did as well. I actually deserve very little credit for what's coming up either, but I have a figurehead role, so I'm happy to be here. I'm Max Bazerman. I'm with Iris. I'm a co-chair of the Behavioral Insights Group, and Iris and I do what Abby tells us to do, and life is good. So we're going to have another set of parallel sessions, and my job is simply to introduce the four people who will be talking for about 10 minutes apiece to introduce their sessions. I'll tell you who they are in a second. The last will be Hunt. When Hunt is done, our session ends. Again, no Q&A in the plenary. Rather, the Q&A and the contributions will happen in the breakout rooms. So when we leave here, we head out. Again, coffee break over in Aldridge, and then you go to your breakout group at 3:30. The breakout groups last from 3:30 to 5, and then we have a reception upstairs in this building at 5 o'clock. So that's kind of the itinerary. So now all I need to do is tell you who our four overview speakers are. From the University of Pennsylvania, we have Katy Milkman and Angela Duckworth, followed by my colleague at the Harvard Business School, Alison Brooks, and then Hunt Allcott from NYU. But just to be clear, Hunt and Katy are Harvard people. They just happen to be employed at other universities. Okay, and with that, I'll turn it over to Abby, to Katy.
Oh, it's me. Okay. Awesome. So we all kind of did different things with this, and what I'm going to do with my time with you guys is first tell you a little bit about the awesome session that I've put together and try to convince lots of you to defect from other sessions and come to mine, ours, I should say. And I'll tell you about the awesome talks that are coming from lots of my heroes. I am not going to be speaking at my session. I thought you'd hear from me here, and that'd be more than enough. So I'll also tell you very briefly about some of my research while I have the stage for this brief moment. Okay, so why are we having a session on public health and behavioral insights? This is a really easy one. It turns out 40% of premature deaths are the result of decisions that we make. Decisions about whether to eat right, whether to smoke, whether or not to exercise, get preventative care. So huge opportunity here. This is so easy to queue up. I invited a bunch of my heroes to speak today, and pretty much all of them said yes. So we have a star-studded set of research talks. And the way I've structured the session I'm going to explain in a moment is really to see, we're going to see 7 different academics give TED-style 5-minute talks, highlights from their research. Then we're going to have 2 practitioners pose big questions. And the story I'll tell you about my own work afterwards will explain why I've set it up this way. So I apologize for reading from a piece of paper, but I will botch people's planned talks if I don't actually look at this. Emily Oster is going to start us off. She'll talk about a paper using household scanner data to infer what diet changes consumers make after receiving health news like a diabetes diagnosis. Then Leslie John will talk about a paper showing that if you restrict the size of sugary drinks, there are different options you can use that might make that strategy more palatable to consumers. Next, Justin Sidner will talk about studies he's done on changing exercise patterns, suggesting that just jump-starting exercise change is not enough to produce lasting behavior change. You need other tactics too, like a self-funded commitment contract or sporadic incentives. Next, Gretchen Chapman will tell us about some of her research and others' research revealing that to increase vaccination rates, we should intervene on behavior directly rather than or in addition to trying to change beliefs and attitudes. Kevin Volpe, who is coming from my host institution, is going to talk to us about the fact that patients and doctors only spend a very small amount of their time together. And during the time when patients are out in the world living their lives, we need to find ways to intervene and change behavior for the better. And behavioral economics and wearable devices offer exciting solutions. Then Aaliyah Crom will talk about the power of mindset to shape the benefits of diet and exercise and how we can alter behavioral economic strategies to more effectively harness mindset in our attempts to improve health and well-being. And finally, last but definitely not least, Peter Ubel will describe a study of physician and patient communication that has helped him to identify missed opportunities to help reduce patient out-of-pocket spending. Okay, so those are the amazing talks you'll hear if you come to our session. Following that, we're going to have two superstar practitioners who are really plugged into the behavioral science community inspire us by proposing big questions that researchers should be thinking more about. We have Robert Sakadivan, and I hope I didn't butcher the pronunciation of that too much, Robert, wherever you are in the audience. He is coming to us from Humana, and he's going to talk about the opportunities in healthcare to find interventions that work against subpopulations rather than trying to find interventions that will solve all of our problems in one fell swoop. And then Jesse Wisdom, who comes to us from Google, will emphasize the importance of helping employees achieve better health outcomes, better care experiences, and lower costs by correctly matching their issue with the right service during a stressful situation. Okay, I'm done reading, I promise, but now hopefully you guys kind of get what's coming, and I've done my job as a previewer. And now I'll do sort of the self-centered part where I tell you a little bit about my own research, and I'll do it in a way to explain why I set this up the way I did. So here, the reason that we're going to have these practitioners following these TED-style research talks is that I had a really amazing and sort of life-changing experience that came from a session structured quite this way. So I was out at Google a couple of years ago, and I was asked to give a talk about some of my work on nudging flu shots, nudging people to get flu shots. And after I did this, I had this amazing conversation with Prasad Sethi, who's Google's VP of People Analytics and Compensation. And Prasad said, okay, I'm totally sold that we need to nudge our employees to do things that will make them healthier, happier, more productive, et cetera. But one big question I have that no one can answer for me or has answered for me is when should we deploy our nudges? When will they be most effective? What's the right timeline? And I thought that was such an interesting question, and I had no idea. I'd never really thought about it. And so I went back to Wharton and sat down with then my amazing doctoral student, Heng-Chen Dai, now a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. And we started talking about this, and it spurred a line of research we've been working on together ever since. And that's what I'm going to tell you briefly about today. But this is also the motive for the organization of our session. Okay, so the first answer that occurred to me and also to Heng-Chen when we were talking about this was, well, what about the beginning of a new year? At the start of a new year, we have this sense that our past failures are behind us. That was the old me, this is the new me. The fact that I couldn't quit smoking last year when I tried or get into a gym habit, that won't happen again. The new me can do these things. And since we have that fresh start, clean slate feeling, we maybe are more motivated to tackle our goals at the start of a new year. And of course, we see New Year's resolutions, there's a social bandwagon effect, New Year's has all sorts of things going on. But we thought maybe there are other starts to new cycles that would have this same feature of giving us that clean slate, fresh start feeling that would motivate us to tackle our goals. And in our research that we've been doing in the years since I spent this very exciting visit at Google, changing the way I was thinking about the world, we have found that there are lots of other new beginnings that prompt us to change our behavior. So the beginning of a new week, new month, following holidays, following birthdays are just a few examples of new beginnings that seem to motivate us in the same way. So we've got lots of data on this. I'll just highlight one study that I like a lot briefly. This is a study we did of undergraduate gym attendance at the University of Pennsylvania, and we had thousands of undergraduates, and when we looked at when they visited the gym, we found that the very same undergraduate was dramatically more likely to visit the gym earlier in the week, month, year, following holidays, following school breaks, those are the holidays for students, and at the beginning of the semester, and following birthdays, with the notable exception of 21st birthdays. Yeah, I'll let you figure out why that's the case. We see the same patterns when we look at the timeline for when people search for the term diet on Google. Same spikes at those fresh start moments. And also when we look at when people create goals on the goal-setting website stick.com, where you can put money on the line that you'll forfeit if you fail to achieve a goal. And we see this, by the way, not only with health-related goals, but goals in other domains too, like savings, financial goals, educational goals, et cetera. Okay, so we think this is really exciting and starts to answer the question of when is the right time to try to change behavior, when will people be most motivated and open to it. We look at it in a macro perspective in that paper, or actually it's a couple of papers at this point. But another question that we thought was really interesting that was sort of spurred by the same line of thinking was, what about the timing of decisions over shorter time horizons, like the course of a single day? When do we do what we should under those conditions? And so we have another paper where we investigate that and look at hospital caregivers' hand hygiene compliance decisions with millions of observations of when caregivers enter and exit patients' rooms at dozens of hospitals, when do they actually comply with the guideline to sanitize their hands? And what we found there is that there seems to be a similar type of fresh start pattern, but within the course of a single day. This really builds on decades of research on depletion and fatigue, but we find a dramatic pattern in an important field setting where over the course of a day, hand hygiene compliance rates within the same practitioners drop precipitously. And this is even more dramatic, this decline, when we look at work shifts that are particularly intense. So you might say, that's not a huge effect, whatever, 10 percentage points or something. But if we plug in estimates from other people's data about how costly this is in terms of additional infections we can expect as a result of this decline, if we could just get that data to flatline and stay where it starts at the beginning of a work shift, we could literally save thousands of lives and billions of dollars in the US alone. A really cool paper that came out recently by a team of UCLA researchers showed a very similar pattern of behavior when we look at the decision to prescribe unnecessary antibiotics. This also seems to become more common over the course of a workday. So timing really matters, not only writ large, but also in these sort of more micro chunks over the course of a single day. So let me come back to the story I started with. I found it incredibly exciting to have the opportunity to go to an organization, talk about some of my research on behavioral science, and get great questions from practitioners that reshaped the way I was thinking about my research agenda. And my hope is that the session I put together is going to lead to some of those same kinds of opportunities for those in the audience and those presenting. So I hope you guys will come and join us and see my research heroes.
The kind of slide I tell my graduate students never to put up. It's all text, there are no pictures, but I did just make it an hour and a half ago. So I apologize, and I am lucky that I don't have any of my students in the audience. There are some, I'll just say, this is like one of those small world conferences because everybody here already loves each other or is soon to love each other. You have 24 more hours, 27 more hours to do that. There will be an education session that competes with Katy Milkman's. You should absolutely go to ours and not hers. David Yeager will be presenting on national mindset intervention work. Now, those of you who haven't heard the word mindset, maybe you don't have a school-age child because every teacher, it seems, in the United States at least, and certainly in the UK, has heard this phrase, growth mindset. That's the belief that either abilities can change and are malleable over the lifetime or can't. Growth mindset versus fixed mindset. But there are other mindsets, and David is going to illuminate us on really actually taking these interventions to scale. These interventions have been shown to be successful in small, convenient samples, but that always leaves questions about for whom does this really work and how. And David will be sharing data from a new national study. I will also just say that I had the poor decision-making style of taking my sabbatical last term and going to give colloquium talks pretty much every week. Apparently, that's not the best way to spend a sabbatical, but I only figured out afterwards. But most of the departments that I visited, and I am not kidding, the vast majority, were actually actively involved in mindset interventions, really inspired by the work that David Yeager and, of course, Carol Dweck and colleagues have done. And I will tell you that at least a few of those colleagues or these faculty who were doing these mindset interventions undertook that work because they just couldn't believe the effects that were being published. And so they were being proved actually incorrect in that skepticism by their very own data. So I've had the opportunity to just sort of witness the effect that the mindset intervention work is having on psychology departments all over the country, and David's really at the forefront of that. I also consider him to be the best adolescent psychologist of my generation. So come and see David. Bridget Terry Long, right here from Harvard, will be talking about decision-making and education policy, and in particular asking the very fundamental question, how do you explain behavior that seems on the face of it to be irrational? For example, why doesn't everyone take steps to prepare, enroll, and complete college and financial aid paperwork that would benefit them in enormous and very concrete ways. So it's not like you have to do a whole lot of math to figure out whether you should fill out a FAFSA form or not. So how can we really explain what's going on, and in particular, what could be done to actually radically improve student outcomes, in some cases with almost trivial manipulations. So I'm particularly looking forward to that talk. Todd Rogers, who many of you know, is working on social support, asking the question, if we want to improve student performance, what are the gains of targeting people who are not the student, but who care about the student? So these kind of oblique interventions where, for example, you might provide information to the parents of the student as opposed to the student herself or himself. And he'll be looking at a randomized experiment study of about 28,000 students recently completed. And then finally, I get to talk a little bit about my own work. I'm interested in a sort of a big question, which is there are insights from nudge-like studies, there are insights from psychology. And I think one question I had, and I actually had the opportunity to ask Cass Sunstein this when he came to visit University of Pennsylvania last month. I said, nudging is one thing, right? Make it the default to save for retirement. Put the fruit drinks that are sugary in the back instead of in the front. But what about getting people to nudge themselves, right? What if you could equip them with the same behavioral insights and potentially have more generalizable effects and more enduring effects? And he said, I don't think that would work. He's like, that's a good question, but he's just like, I'm just skeptical that you could actually make the insight itself, clear enough to the individual. I'm paraphrasing, and perhaps one of you who's best friends with him can probe a little bit farther. But I do actually think that is the royal road to getting individuals to live healthier, happier, more productive lives. Not that we architect their environment entirely, but that we get them to understand the architecture itself and have them make their own blueprints. So I'm going to use one intervention that my lab has done as a case study in this. Experts practice in a way that is different from amateurs and frankly from the rest of us. It's called deliberate practice, popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers as the 10,000 rule. He got a little bit of it right, and he got some things maybe not as not as the way that scientists who study deliberate practice would put it. But my intervention, really the work of my postdoc, Lauren Esquers-Winkler, asked the question, could you teach kids how experts practice and what experts typically feel emotionally when they're practicing? And could that metacognitive insight change their own behavior and, of course, their academic performance? And I'm going to walk you through our intervention and screen by screen, and it'll be like the director's cut. Like, here's this, but really, this is like Cialdini's, so hopefully it'll be illuminating. And one of the things I want to illuminate is that it's really begged, borrowed, and stolen from Stanford. So I think it was Oscar Wilde who said that, all poets borrow, but the great ones steal. So, in this director's cut, I'm going to show you little tricks that are used to make this intervention effective, make it so that you can teach this metacognitive insight in one class period, but show effects the following marking period. And these are begged, borrowed, and stolen from people like David Yeager, Greg Walton, Carol Dweck, and really like the great social psychologists who laid the groundwork for this. So that's the education session. The format of it will be short talks, roughly 11 minutes or so, and then questions from the fellow speakers as a sort of first dibs on a question that you might want to ask, and then opening it up, of course, to the audience. So thank you in particular for Todd Rogers curating this and designing it, and I look forward to seeing you.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Amazing. My name is Allison Wood Brooks. I am an assistant professor here at HBS. It is my privilege and honor to introduce the organizational behavior breakout session that is happening. I'm really glad that Katy laid down the competitive gauntlet, and now she has run out of the room, so I can really talk about her. So for the record, I don't think that you're supposed to switch sessions, but if you're thinking about it and you'd like to break rules, please come check out the organizational behavior session. We are having talks from myself, Francesca Gino, who is my colleague here at HBS, and Elizabeth Linos, who just finished her PhD at the Harvard Kennedy School and will be taking over the research branch of the Behavioral Insights team in New York City for Behavioral Insights team North America. So unlike other sessions, we didn't have a faculty member or a presenter organizing this session, but rather Abby Dalton emailed us and said, you need to make this happen. And you just don't say no to Abby. And in this moment, I want to give a big thanks to Abby and to Max for making this conference happen. It really is an incredible confluence of wonderful people and wonderful ideas. And is there anything better than sitting in sessions and hearing about people's beautiful, incredible research and work that they've worked on so hard? It's incredible to see people living their lives with such purpose. So in giving this preview, I sat and reflected about what organizational behavior really means. I'm not sure I have the right answer, but here is my take on it. We are interested in people within organizations. I know, it's quite profound. But let me continue on with that. Okay, so who are the presenters? First, we have Elizabeth Linos. As I said, she just finished her PhD at the Kennedy School and is going to be leading the Behavioral Insights team, the research branch in New York City. She is going to be talking about her work on getting more people to sign up for the police force and how to get more diversity in the police force. Then we have Francesca Gino. I don't think Francesca is in the room right now, so I can brag about her relentlessly. She is, without exaggeration, one of the most productive and energetic scholars alive today. She's studied an incredible amount of interesting questions and really has done the work of several scholars in her already at such a young age. And then there's me, Alison Wood-Brooks. Ironically, none of us are actually organizational behavior scholars. None of us are in an OB department, but we do share interests, and we hope we share interests with a lot of you here in this room. First, we want to understand how people think and make decisions. So Francesca, for example, has studied how people who are good at using sarcasm tend to be more creative. Or people who feel anxious, which, by the way, are all people, how we can get them to perform better, to make better decisions. I have found that if you can reframe your performance anxiety as excitement, it leads you to perform better on all kinds of tasks like public speaking, singing, and very difficult math tasks. And actually that flip is easy to do because both anxiety and excitement are high arousal emotions. So it's a quick flip in your own mind to do that. So we're interested in these questions at sort of the intrapsychic level. What can we do in our own minds, sort of to Angela's point of self-nudges? What can we do in our own minds to make us perform better? We also want to understand how people perceive and interact with others. So bumping up a level of analysis, we're not just interested in individuals, but we're interested in how they interact with each other. One example, I'll tell you about a project that I'm working on with my doctoral student, Karen Huang, here at HBS, and Francesca Gino, and Julia Minson, and Mike Yemens. We are deeply interested in the psychology of conversation. Conversation drives productivity at work, our relationships, the bedrock of our relationships outside of work, and yet very little research has been done on the psychology of conversation. So one thing we were interested in is how people tend to ask questions versus make statements when they're talking to other people. So literally the ratio between question marks and periods in the things that you're saying to each other. And what we find is when this ratio is higher, the more questions that you're asking influence learning, because if I ask Hunt a question, he's going to answer me, and therefore I'm going to be learning things. But also, Hunt is likely to like me better, because by asking questions, it's an expression of empathy. I'm curious, I'm interested in what he has to say, and it's going to get him talking, and self-disclosure feels good. So he attributes that good feeling to me. All right, we want to understand how people operate in hierarchies, groups, organizations, and government. So again, we're bumping up another level of analysis. And this, I'm going to give the example of Elizabeth's research here. She's studying how, as a government, how can we design our recruitment strategies to get more people to sign up for the police force? And she's going to be talking about that a little bit in our session. And then finally, we want to help people and their organizations thrive. And thriving is really broadly construed. What does it mean to thrive? Well, for organizations, it might mean something like profit. But for people here, it might mean a higher purpose than just profit. So the happiness of the employees in the organization, achieving our impact goals, anything that you can imagine that actually means success to you. Organizational scholars are interested in these outcome variables. Okay, so what will we be doing exactly in the OB session later? First, we're actually going to have an interactive activity. So we're gonna break the fourth wall, and rather than just having presenters address the audience, we're going to do an exercise all together. So what are your core goals in life? Why? Are you actually pursuing them? Like, how are you allocating your time? And when and how? Then Francesca is going to talk about a paper that she and I wrote together about gender in the workplace and people's preferences for achieving power in the workplace. Then I'm going to tell you about a sort of related paper about gender in entrepreneurship. And finally, Elizabeth is going to tell you about her work on diversity in the police force. So you'll notice that this seems like a little bit of an extension of the diversity conversation that Iris and Linda and Evan started earlier this morning. So we are very, very excited to present this work. We hope that you will not ditch our session for Katy's session, and we will see you later.
Great. Well, I will not stoop to the level of arguing about whose session is better. It's sort of like the Harvard-MIT debate. I think the answer is pretty clear, or at least Max would agree that the answer is pretty clear. But I want to start by giving you some information on our lineup for the environmental session. I've invited the usual suspects of people that you'd want to have at this sort of session, some people that I think are really some of my favorite folks at the intersection of behavior and environment. So first, on your left is Paul Ferraro. He's the Bloomberg Distinguished Professor of Water and Environmental Economics at Johns Hopkins University. Second is Mark Layton. He's the VP of Product Management for Opower. Third is Rick Larrick. He's the Michael Krzyzewski University professor at Duke University, which sounds like a very big deal, and I think it is. Fourth is me. And fifth is Kelsey Jack, who's an economics professor at Tufts University. And incidentally, for those of you who know who's where in these pictures, I think of Kelsey as the Kaiser Sose of environmental economics. What we'll do in our session is we'll cover some of the key areas where environmental issues are arising, from air pollution to waste management to water scarcity to deforestation and climate change. And we'll ask, can behavioral science help make conservation a win-win? And what do I mean by win-win? I mean, notice that resource use can be harmful to the environment and can be costly because it's costly to provide energy and water. And so by using less resources, we can both keep the earth from burning up in the context of climate change and put more money in our pockets. And perhaps with that additional money, we could buy this guy a longer tie. Now, throughout the actually five presentations that we'll have from our usual suspects, there are going to be several key themes, and I want to just start to highlight what those key themes are going to be. The first is the idea of using applied psychology as a substitute for getting prices right. And indeed, that's one of the big motivations for working in this space when you think deeply about what's going on. And so the logic seems to be as follows. The price of energy or water is below social marginal cost because of political economy constraints. So we haven't been able to implement a carbon tax in most places, and we haven't been able to raise the price of water when there's a drought. Thus, as a substitute for higher prices, we think about encouraging conservation with applied psychology, techniques such as persuasion or lotteries or goal setting or social comparisons. And this logic, which I think you see a lot out in the field, raises a number of questions, including, well, is the price of energy or water really below social marginal cost? And second, when is it that applied psychology might actually be a good substitute for higher prices? A second theme that will arise in our discussion is the idea of tailoring nudges to market failures. And what I see is that the environment space, and hopefully other spaces as well, are shifting towards a more tailored nudge design process that has two steps. One is we try to understand exactly what the market failure is. Is it that consumers are poorly informed? And if so, what exactly is it that they're poorly informed about? And second, what instrument then best targets that problem or that market failure that we've identified? And this, there's going to be a great example from one of our panelists, Rick Larrick, that I think really highlights how this logic has been used well. So Rick, in a paper with Jack Stoll in 2008 that many of you guys know, called the MPG illusion in science, highlighted that people make mistakes when evaluating fuel economy across different cars, and in particular that we mistakenly think that gasoline use scales linearly in miles per gallon, whereas in fact it scales linearly in gallons per mile. So when that was taken to the policy space, the implication was not that we should subsidize hybrid vehicles because consumers make mistakes about fuel economy. It was not that we should encourage people to ride their bikes because consumers make mistakes around cars. But it was a much more precise understanding of what the problem was and then how to fix it. And in particular, it was among other things, redesigning how we use fuel economy labels to convey information to consumers in a way that they can better understand. In particular, framing savings in terms of overall dollars instead of only using the miles per gallon metric. So Rick will talk more about that and other information disclosure issues during his talk. A third theme that will come up is better use of benefit cost analysis. And of course, with nudges, it can be very difficult to do what we think of as a full benefit cost analysis that you might do in other areas. So instead, what's been happening is that people use what you might call a cost effectiveness heuristic. So an argument you see a lot is, well, intervention X caused large behavior change and was cheap to implement, therefore policymakers should broadly adopt it. And this heuristic misses a number of things that we'll talk about during the session. And we'll talk about recent efforts to improve cost-benefit analysis. In particular, I'll discuss some work that I've done with our panelist Mark Layton's company, O-Power, to do a more holistic cost-benefit evaluation of their energy use social comparison reports. And I've given you the key figure on this slide, which is you can tally up benefits and costs in a more holistic way using consumers' willingness to pay to be nudged. A fourth theme will be around smart targeting. So notice that with improvements in information technology, we're now increasingly able to target specific nudges at specific people. So we can take a group of people and say, this person should have a higher retirement savings default, and this person should have a lower retirement savings percent default. And if we have an intervention that we're delivering via email or via letters, we can say these people should be targeted and these people should not. And if we have 3 different interventions, we can target some people with intervention A and other people with intervention B. And so how do we decide to do that? One way, and a natural way, is to use prediction algorithms using the data that we have from existing experiments. So I did not have any good graphics to illustrate machine learning and prediction, so I just put up my own code for a prediction algorithm that I had worked on, and we'll talk more about all this during the session. So, and there'll be a quiz on that code, by the way. So What I want to convey is not that you should switch sessions, of course, but environment is a... These issues, I think you've probably noticed, illustrate how some of the discussions in the environment space are really a microcosm of issues that we're discussing in all the subfields of behavioral science, or all the applied areas. So in particular, asking, why are we nudging? What's the market failure or behavioral failure we're trying to address? Second, once we've identified that, what is the nudge that's best tailored to address that market failure or behavioral failure? Third, how do we do cost-benefit analysis? How do we determine which nudges have the highest net benefits? Which nudges should receive the most attention from policymakers? And fourth, how can we target nudges to maximize net benefits? So again, close analogs in other non-environment domains, and we hope to see all of you at 3:30.